All right, let's go ahead and get started. So title of the session is Trust No One, Protecting Your Data in a Zero Trust World. My name is Dave Branscome. I am a Senior Cloud Security Architect at Microsoft. So welcome to this presentation. Just want to make sure everybody's aware that next year, if everything goes well with this whole COVID-19 thing, we'll all be able to meet in Las Vegas in March of 2021 at the MGM Grand Resort. So hopefully that'll be the case. We want to thank all our sponsors. So give a shout out to them for making this event possible and for coordinating such a huge undertaking. There's really a lot of speakers, a lot of effort went into this. So the help that these sponsors provided is greatly appreciated. Okay, so let me introduce myself. That's a picture of me. I am, as mentioned, Cloud Security Architect at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for 12 years. Seen a lot of change and really love the company. I'm based out of North Carolina in the USA. So if you're not from the US, if you know where New York is and you know where Florida is, North Carolina is right in the middle on the coast. So right now we're in the middle of a tropical depression storm. So if my internet goes out, sorry to say that's a real possibility, but right now it's just pretty dark and wet outside, but I'm enjoying being here. Okay, so let's talk about Trust No One and data security. So here's where I'm going to show you how old I actually am. What do you remember about 1998, the year 1998? Do you remember anything? You remember this guy? It's Bill Clinton. That doesn't look like Hillary. I don't know if you guys remember the story that went on there. It's Monica Lewinsky. I know I had a couple of these things, the Sony Discman or Walkman, whatever it was called. This is also the year that Michael Jordan shot a game winner against the Utah Jazz at the last second, and he was overcome with the flu at the time. Then a little company named Google got started in 1998. Hard to believe that it feels very recent when you say 1998, but it's been a while now. This is another thing I remember from 1998. There was this battle going on between a powerhouse called Novell. They had an operating system, a network operating system called NDS. Some of you probably worked on it. And this scrappy little upstart called Microsoft put out Windows NT that blue screened a lot and had to be rebooted anytime you changed anything. And Novell was just sailing along, not a whole lot to fear at the time. Things changed very quickly, didn't they? At the time, I also had a pretty clever, what I thought was an unguessable password. It was Trust No One. So I was working at a financial institution at the time, and that's the password that I came up with. And I thought, there's no way anybody would ever guess this password. This is too good. So fast forward 15 years to 2013. This is about the time I hadn't started working at Microsoft yet. No, I actually had. Yeah, 2013 I would have. But I was a little more security conscious, and I started looking around at different hacking forums and studying security in a lot more depth. And one of the things I found was the password location, or the places on the internet where passwords were stored, and Payspin was a big one. And so I went on Payspin one day and looked at this password list. This was back on May 20th, 2013. And lo and behold, there was my password, number 9 on the list of passwords that hackers would use to try to break into organizations using brute force password cracking. So that wasn't real encouraging. I wasn't real happy about that. If any of you have ever seen this this concept of word clouds. There's a website called Information is Beautiful, and this particular word cloud or data visualization really is what it is showing a representation of the most popular passwords that people use. And there's mine, trustno1. So the further to the right that you go, the more common it was to see this password, and the higher up you go. I can't remember exactly how it was exactly. Maybe the easier it was to crack or something like that. So in any case, trustno1 was not a very safe password to be using at the time. But if you take a look at some of the others, NCC 1701, that's easily recognizable as a Star Trek reference. Rush 2112, that's a record by the band Rush. OU 812, that's from Van Halen. Jordan 23 is reference to Michael Jordan. 007. So a lot of these passwords are very, very easy to guess if you put a little bit of effort into it. So now let's fast forward to last year. Have things changed at all? So from Microsoft's perspective, one of the things that we've seen and some of the things that we believe will be true, by next year, 25% of the world's personal data will have been compromised and housed in a data lake to be analyzed and utilized by consortiums of threat actors. So in other words, using economies of scale, these threat actors will be able to create massive data lakes of personally identifiable information, whether it's passwords or addresses, social security numbers, bank account numbers, and they'll be able to just use this information to perform their illicit activities. That's scary. That's next year. 750% growth in the number of ransomware families in 2016. So we're in 2020 now. And this was this 750% growth preceded the Petya, not Petya, SamSam, all the major ransomware families that we're seeing in more recent years, and it's not going away. These criminal organizations and attackers are getting the benefit that they want out of the ransomware attacks, and so they're going to continue to use them until they stop making money. There's no reason for them to stop making ransomware. I saw an article just 2 days ago where the latest technique is to embed a ransomware tool inside a VM, and that would allow them to bypass antivirus checks in systems. So they could launch the ransomware from inside the VM and deliver it to the corporate organization. Now, this required a little bit more work. This was probably nation state type of work, but in any case, there are new and evolving techniques in the ransomware category. And in just 2 years, by 2022, a third of successful attacks experienced by enterprises will be on their shadow IT resources. So most of you have probably heard the expression shadow IT, but for those that have not, what this is referring to is applications or services that have been purchased outside of the typical procurement methodology that IT might require within an organization. So the finance department decides that rather than using OneDrive, they want to use Box or Dropbox or whatever it is. And because it's outside the IT organization's control and vision, the finance department maybe doesn't put the same security on it and doesn't validate that the stuff is properly protected. And so because it's being protected by people that don't really understand security, this is where we see these successful attacks taking place against these shadow IT resources. This is certainly happening today, but we expect that trend to continue to increase over the years. So what this brings us to is my password, trust no one. We really can't trust um, the people within our organization, the people that are sending us email, the people that house our data. We have to figure out ways to protect our data in different ways. So Microsoft has this concept of zero trust. There are certainly other organizations that leverage this term zero trust and implement it in different ways. Google has a zero trust white paper as well. I am a little preferential towards the Microsoft version because I feel like it does make a lot more sense in the way that it's implemented. It seems much more straightforward and simple. But really the question is, what is zero trust? When we talk about zero trust, what is it and how do we achieve zero trust? So if you want to find out the details of how Microsoft implements zero trust in our network, go to ak.ms/zero trust. And the details are found there. So what does zero trust mean? Essentially, what we're saying when we talk about zero trust is that we are looking at the sum total of the humans that are trying to connect to your data, the devices that are trying to connect to your data, the workloads that comprise your data. In other words, are they connecting to Exchange? Are they connecting to SharePoint? Are they connecting to Salesforce? So we're identifying what workload they're connecting to. And then we're combining that with intelligence about all these different things. So is the device compromised? Is it Azure AD joined? Is it hybrid Azure AD joined? Is the person signing in from a risky location? Are they signing in? Have they had multiple failed password attempts? Things like that. We're combining that intelligence with these other, you might say, static factors. And once we've analyzed all those elements, then we'll grant access to the data. And this can be true whether you're inside the corporate network or outside the corporate network. It doesn't make any difference. We have to view the entire ecosystem as a threat. So even people within the organization sitting on the managed corporate network can still be subject to this zero trust methodology. And that's true within Microsoft. So if I'm on the Microsoft corporate network, I might be able to get right through to my HR details and my payroll details. But if I'm sitting at home on a Microsoft managed device, but on a different network, I might get prompted for multi-factor authentication, or I might get prompted to verify my identity using Windows Hello or something like that. So same person, same device, just a different location changes the methodology of how you grant me access to my data. So if we look at the attack kill chain, many of us have seen the attack kill chain. I'll just build this all out. What this is talking about, and most of you are familiar with what the concept is behind the attack kill chain. It's the steps that an attacker will take to compromise an environment and how they escalate their privileges, how they end up exfiltrating data. So let's kind of walk through this. And what I really want you to understand is that at each step of the way, and sometimes in overlapping ways, Microsoft tools are able to break the kill chain of the attackers if the tools are implemented properly. So we're looking at things like Office Advanced Threat Protection for protecting email. So how can that help? So phishing email comes in, a user clicks on a URL. In most cases, if that URL points to a website that maybe has a piece of malware that is then downloaded, or it initiates some process that gets installed on a machine and it exploits that machine, that can very easily lead to the first step of the compromise. But if you're using advanced threat protection, you can use what we call safe links. And so safe links analyzes that URL. It checks to see what the behavior is when a person clicks on that URL, before it actually allows the user to go to the URL. So you
Brian,
click on,
excuse me 1 second. Your share screen is not being shared.
oh, it's not being shared?
No, no, your screen is not being shared.
Has it
Can
been
you
not shared
fix
for
it?
the whole time?
I just joined in. I think so.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. All right, there we go. So the clicking on the URL leads to the safe links. Safe links protects the user from going to the malicious URL. The other path that could happen, that a compromise could happen, is the phishing email comes with an attachment. The user opens an attachment. The attachment has some sort of malware in it, or kicks off a PowerShell or a macro of some sort that then exploits the machine. Again, using safe attachments can prevent that from happening by opening the attachment in a sandbox environment. And that sandbox environment is they're Azure virtual machines. They are different versions of Windows. So we'll open it in Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows 8, just to verify that the behavior isn't unique to a specific operating system. We'll test to make sure that the attachment is safe, and if it is, then we'll allow it to be passed on to the end user. If it is deemed to not be safe, then we can take action depending on how the admin determines it should be done. Another way that phishing email could be leveraged is you click on a URL, it takes you to a site that prompts you to log in. And it could look all the world like your own corporate login page. And what's actually behind it is the attacker has created a false login page. And when you try to log in, they capture your credentials, and then they're able to go in and compromise user account and perform all the bad things that they like to do. So how do we protect against that? Azure AD Identity Protection allows you to verify the locations where users are logging in, times of day, the various characteristics that uniquely identify your login as being authentic or as being a little questionable. So Azure AD Identity Protection can help prevent these types of attacks from being successful. Now, once we get down into this area where if we assume that through the attack kill chain, an attacker has gotten to this point where they've compromised a user, they've established persistence on a machine or multiple machines, then they start doing other things. They start trying to perform lateral movement, going from one machine to the next, trying to find either a machine that has data that they want, or where there are credentials on a machine that they can harvest and escalate their privileges. So as part of that attack process, one of the things that we can be looking for using Azure ATP, we can be looking for those pass the hash attacks. We can be looking for DC shadows. We can be looking for the different types of attacks that are typically performed inside the network, because we know what these look like, and we can follow how these are taking place. This also plays a role Azure AD privileged identity management. So if you've got a privileged account, someone that has maybe global admin, domain admin, an exchange admin credentials, or local admin credentials on file servers or an HR server, we can list those as privileged identities. And by using this privileged identity management, we can ensure that when a user account is compromised, that you're alerted on it, or we can ensure that the identity is prevented from being used outside of a given time. So we could say you have these privileges for the next hour, and then after that hour, those privileges are revoked from your account. So it's the concept of just in time and just enough admin privileges. Then going on to this area where the attacker has accessed some sensitive data in your corporate network, and they begin the process of exfiltrating that data to wherever they want to send it, to some place where they have they can at their leisure peruse the data. We have Microsoft Cloud App Security. So Microsoft Cloud App Security allows you to look at the data that is inside your network, and even if the data is being stored in third-party repositories, like I mentioned, if it's on Citrix FileShare or Dropbox or Google Drive, we can track the access to those services and see where the data is being moved, even from those other locations. And so we have the ability to ensure that data is protected, even if it's outside of the Microsoft realm of services. All right, so if we count down the principles of zero trust, the first, the third one, I guess you could say, is that identity is the control plane. Identity is what we have to secure if we have any hope of securing the data itself. We have to secure the user identities, and so that's why we are in favor of organizations and services leveraging Azure Active Directory as the single sign-on point of truth. Because then there's a single place where identity is being housed, a single place where you have to secure your identities, and we have a number of tools that allow you to secure those identities. Once you're able to secure the identity, the access to all these other locations where data could reside can then be properly secured. And I'll show you how that can be done in a fairly easy way. The second concept, assume every resource is on the open internet. So if we look at this, you might think this is a misspelling, that this should actually say internet, but it's not. So what this is saying is I'm going to look at this set of criteria. Who is the person? What is the device? What is their location? What's the workload? Overall, what's the risk? What does it appear their intent is in performing things in this manner? Are they trying to maneuver to get higher privileges? Are they trying to access something that they typically don't have access to? So we're trying to make a judgment on the intent of the attacker, and based on that, then we can make a judgment call as far as allow or not allow. And last, this concept is the most important one. Never trust anybody. Always verify. No matter where your end users are coming from, no matter who they claim to be, always verify their identity, verify their machine, verify the actions that have taken place using that identity over the last couple hours, last couple days, whatever it might be. This is the concept of zero trust. Never trust a machine simply because it's on the inside of your network. Never trust anyone simply because they have a username and password. Verify who they are, verify the machine they're on, verify the workload they're connecting to. And what that comes down to is trust no one. So let's take a look at a demo. I'm going to switch over to my other machine and share that desktop out. And I'll show you some of the tools that I've been describing over the last few minutes. All right, so one of the things that we talked about is this idea of identity, protecting identity. Let me make this just a tad bigger so it's easier to see. All right, so I'm here in my M365 Admin Center. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, this location. There's several places that I can go here. What I'm going to do is go to Azure Active Directory, and I've already got this set up just to save some time on connecting to things. I've got a number of applications or a number of tools that I've stored as my favorites. that are related to identity. So I've got Azure AD Identity Secure Score, Identity Protection, Multi-Factor Authentication, Conditional Access, and some others. But let's take a look at Identity Secure Score. So many of you are familiar with Secure Score in the Office 365 world, but there are Secure Score dashboards for SQL, for Azure, for identity, for storage, and so forth. The goal, of course, is to start pulling all these together into a single dashboard that is comprehensive. It takes a little bit of time, but these individual Secure Score dashboards will still be available. So when I look at the Secure Score, what this is telling me is that out of a possible 203 points, this point value being driven or being derived from the types of licenses that I have, the types of services that are available in my Azure tenant, and so on. This isn't a static number that every tenant will see. This is just what's available in my tenant. But out of that 203, I've got a score of 93, which means I'm a little bit below half of what Microsoft believes from a best practices standpoint I could be. So what are the things that I can change, things I can improve? Well, one of the biggest and one of the first things that we always recommend that an organization does or that a partner does with the customer is implement MFA. So implement MFA for your administrative roles, implement MFA for your user roles. Implementing MFA can be the single greatest security measure that you can implement and with very little effort if you're using multi-factor authentication in Azure AD. It can be as simple as sending text messages to a phone as the second method of authentication. Now, that is not the most secure method. We would prefer you use something like an authenticator app or some kind of a token or whatever it might be. But SMS text messaging is certainly a method that is available. So what we're saying is that if you implemented MFA for your administrative roles, this would impact the score by 25 points. So that means that I would increase my score from 93 to, 118. So that would get me over the halfway point just by implementing MFA for my admins. And you can see what the score impact would be for some other things. Turning on user risk policy would be a very valuable thing to do. And this is just based on what Microsoft has seen to be the most consequential things that you can do to improve the security of your environment. We also give you an idea of what the impact will be to your end users. So while it will be nice to make sure that users enroll for multi-factor authentication, this is going to have a high impact on your users and potentially a high implementation cost if you're using YubiKeys or RSA tokens or things like that. That can be fairly expensive. So it also helps you to categorize or not categorize, prioritize which things you want to do and when. So this is a good tool to use to begin the process of securing your identities. Let's move on to a different area. So if we go to Azure AD Conditional Access. So I talked about conditional access being a very powerful tool that you can use to help secure your environment. In other words, saying that if this user is logging in with this machine from this location, I want them to be forced to use multi-factor authentication or whatever the case may be. So if I go in here and look at the session control for Teams, notice that this is turned on. So this policy is already implemented. I'll show you how this conditional access policy is set up, and it's not hard to do at all. So I define, first of all, who are the users that I want to impact with this conditional access policy. In this case, I've said that I'm going to use this for all users, but for example, I could use this just for my guest users or external users. So think of this as like people that are external to your company that are maybe vendors, people that you work with on a regular basis, partner organizations that you share data with on a regular basis, rather than giving them a full-fledged user account and a VPN account and giving them pretty much standard user access. You can change the way that they are able to connect to your network and require a tighter security posture from them. So, but in this case, what I'm doing is I'm requiring this of all users. Then you define what application do you want to secure with this policy. In this case, I've said I'm going to secure Microsoft Teams, but I could say any of these applications that are available as single sign-on applications. Now, there's a lot of applications that are Microsoft-based, but as you see here, I've got one for Twitter. I've got a human resources application. I've got Box. I think there's an AWS or Amazon. No, not Amazon. Salesforce. So you could implement this with Salesforce. So you could say if a person is trying to connect to Salesforce, I want their process for authenticating or the process for connecting to Salesforce to be different. In this case, I've said I'm going to look at Teams. So if any user is connecting to Teams and they meet these conditions, so if their sign-in risk is high, right, I haven't configured it in this case, but if their sign-in risk is high, medium, low, or no risk, then perform this set of actions. I'm not going to do anything in that case. If their device platform is an Android device, an iOS device, a Windows, a Mac device, if they're coming from a specific location, so let's say I wanted to say, if you're coming from Afghanistan, then I'm going to implement a stricter policy on you because most of the time our users are not logging in from Afghanistan. I could also say, this is a set of trusted IPs, maybe within my corporate network. So if you're accessing from my trusted IP range, then I'm going to have a different set of criteria for you to connect to my services. So I'm going to turn this off. I can also say, what's the device state? Is it, hybrid Azure AD joined? Is the device marked as compliant? Whatever I want to do there. Then I can go to the access control. What do I want to happen when the user meets that set of criteria? I want to grant them access, but maybe I want to force multi-factor authentication on them. Maybe I want them to accept my terms of use document before they can connect, right? So I can force that to happen. And then finally, in this case with Teams, what I've done is I've said, use a conditional access app control. And I'll show you what that means in just a minute. But essentially what I've done here is I've said, anybody in my organization who tries to connect to Teams is going to be forced to go through this conditional access app control. So what does this actually look like in practical terms? Let's go to my Teams client, and we should see this happen in real time. So I'm trying to get to Teams, and the conditional access policy should kick in here. And there we go. Access to Microsoft Teams is monitored. For improved security, your organization allows access to Microsoft Teams in monitor mode. Access is only available from a web browser, and then continue on to Microsoft Teams. So it's throwing up that notification because I meet the conditional access requirements, and now it's putting me through to Microsoft Teams in the web app. Okay, so very easy to set up conditional access control, and there's a lot of functionality that you can provide in here. You remember I pointed out named locations. So here's where I define those named locations. Here's where you configure your trusted IPs for MFA. So you can say things like, if people are coming from this particular country, then I want to make sure, I'm just going to say Azerbaijan, not that I have any issues with Azerbaijan. So now, if the IP range that a user is connecting from matches an IP range that is typically seen in Azerbaijan, then I can apply conditional access policy to them. I can also, as I mentioned, apply terms of use. So here's the terms of use. I can go in here and say, I've got a new terms of use policy that I'm going to use. So this is, we'll call it Fabricam TOU. Is my display name. Upload the document. I'll just upload some quick document just so I have something. That's probably too big. Yeah, it's too big. But anyway, you can upload your terms of use document, and then what would happen is when the user logs on, if they meet the criteria, they'll be prompted with that terms of use document, and you can say they have to expand the terms of use and they have to consent on every device. I can expire those consents every, let's say, every month, right? So if this is for your partners, your vendors, maybe you want them to verify that they read the terms of use every month, just so that there's this constant reminder that they're accessing somebody else's network. You can configure that. I've already got one set up here for Contoso, so you can kind of see what that looks like. There's nothing fancy about it. But that can be another condition for my conditional access. So conditional access is another great way of securing your environment and protecting your identities, making sure that the devices that are connecting to your network are secure, making sure that the networks that they're on, that they're connecting from, are secure, and that the identities are being protected effectively. So I talked about Azure AD Identity Secure Score, but I also made reference to the fact that there is a secure score built into M365. So if I go to M365 and go to Secure Score, we have made some improvements here to the Secure Score methodology. So as you saw with the Identity Secure Score, it was a number like a fractional number. It was 32 out of 56 or 93 out of 203. So, and in this case, it has that measuring, but what we prefer to see is just a percentage, right? People kind of understand that better than they know, what does 50 out of 158 mean? So we're just giving it a percentage score because then that tells you kind of how far you are on the path to 100. So with Microsoft Secure Score, we have the same sort of process going on. And you remember I mentioned that there are different types of Secure Scores dashboards, and this is where they're being pulled together in this Microsoft 365 security dashboard. So we have the identity. So how are we protecting identity? How are we protecting the data in your tenant? How are you protecting the devices, the Windows devices that have maybe Microsoft Defender on them? Are those devices secure? Are they, do they have the latest version of Defender? Are they, have they connected back recently? Have they sent their sensor information back on a regular basis? Those sort of things. Applications, so OneDrive, Exchange, SharePoint, have you configured the controls in those services to ensure that they're secure? And then infrastructure. This has to do with Azure. So Azure Security Center has Azure Secure Score as well, and how you can configure your Azure security is baked into all this. So you have it's getting closer and closer to a one location to rule them all as far as security is concerned, and as far as from a Microsoft perspective, how we manage our services and the services that you're consuming. So again, using the same sort of methodology, how do I fix the problems? I've got some things I need to address. If I click on that, here's the things that it's recommending I do. So I can say here again is the multi-factor authentication. If I click on that, I can assign this. So I can say, we've got this planned. I want to manage this. Actually, it's going to take me to the portal. That's not what I wanted to do. What this will do is allow me to view how to actually implement MFA, how many users will be affected by this. Two out of 37 users registered and protected with MFA. So that means I have 35 other users that I need to change. Which users will be impacted? All of them in this case. But there could be other services or steps that I implement where I'm only implementing affecting a subset of users, maybe just the admins, maybe just SharePoint users, whatever it might be. I also get some information here about what I'm protecting against. So by implementing this MFA process, I'm helping to secure my environment against password cracking, against password or account breaches, and so on. So I can say save and close, and it shows up as being planned. So you can go through here, and this really does help you create an action plan that can help you start securing your environment really across the board, because as you notice here, it tells you what type of product is involved in the security. So it might be Microsoft Defender, might be Azure Active Directory, Azure ATP, Microsoft Cloud App Security, and so on. So you're able to secure identity across the board there. Okay, that is Secure Score, the second aspect of Secure Score. One of the things I talked about was when we talk about conditional access, and we looked at the policy here. It's not defined in this one, but if I go back to my policies and open this up, you remember that there was this sign-in risk element that I could define, right? So whether the sign-in risk of the user was high, medium, low, or no risk. So where is that value coming from? Where is that sign-in risk coming from? Well, it's coming from Azure AD risky sign-in or risky users, risk detections. That's what that's looking at. So if I look at risky sign-ins, this will take me ever so quickly to the risky sign-in page. And at this point, I don't have any here. So what I'm going to do is go over to risky users. And I already have that tab pulled up here. And so I've got some high-risk users. So this is what it looks like when you pull it up. It shows that I've got some new risky users detected. I pull it over. I say, click on the high-risk users. Okay, now I've got some users that are deemed to be high-risk users, and I can look at them and try to figure out why are they at risk? Why is their risk level high? I look at Alan DeYoung. Okay, so in this case, we see that he is based in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but Waukesha. Anyway, that's his normal login location, but we're seeing that he is at a risk level of high. Let me make this just a little bit bigger again. Okay, so his risk level is high. Let's try to figure out why. See if it has to do with his recent sign-ins. Okay, no recent risky sign-ins detected. Nothing detected at sign-in. Let's see if the risk history has anything to tell us. Okay. So in this case, he logged in from what appeared to be a malicious IP address. So maybe this was a Tor browser that he was logging in from, or maybe he logged in from a machine that was a known botnet node or something along that line. So that automatically raises his risk level to high. And so what happens is when conditional access evaluates Alan's login, if I have the condition set for configure, if his risk is high, what's going to happen is I can set a different policy for those very risky sign-ins. I can say if you've got the sign-in risk of high, then I'm going to force you to perform multi-factor authentication. That's what I would prefer, so that I can verify that it's actually you and not somebody that's compromised your credentials. Okay, so that's what the risky users is useful for. You can also do some things up here to take action on the user. You can reset their password. You can confirm that they're compromised, dismiss it as a false positive. You can block the user altogether if you're sure that they've been compromised and someone is illicitly using their login, or you can investigate with Azure Advanced Threat Protection. So I don't have this configured, so I can't click on it, but you could do that if you have the licensing set up. The last thing I'm going to show here is Cloud App Security. So you remember when I connected to Teams, I was forced to acknowledge that my Teams activity was being monitored, right? You saw the little pop-up that came when I tried to get to Teams. And I mentioned that that was part of the session control that was going on here in Teams. So when I tried to get to Teams, I have this session control set up. So this session control is defined here in Cloud App Security. So if I go to this little pair of glasses, this investigate, and go down to connected apps, it takes me to this tab. And then if I click over to the conditional access app control apps, here I have Teams. Okay, so what this is telling me is that I'm able to monitor who is logging into Teams and who is logged in and successfully passed the conditional access control. So we're on the 28th, so the record isn't the most current right now. It's still showing yesterday's, but by tomorrow this will have been updated, and it'll show that I've tried to log in to Teams and was active in it. It also tells me which users were connected. It tells me more about Teams actually in this particular tab. It shows me about the application itself, what security and compliance criteria it meets. You know, does it meet FISMA? Does it meet SOC, HIPAA? What legal requirements it meets, for example, GDPR. It tells me which user accounts have logged into Teams recently. So my user accounts that have connected to Teams. I have this little exclamation point, or it actually looks like a necktie. I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be, but what that's telling me is that the person that's logging in has elevated credentials, and so I might need to pay closer attention to what's happening here. So if I look at this, I see that Megan is a company administrator. Okay, so that's that tells me, you know, maybe pay a little bit of attention to what's going on here, because her identity being compromised would be a very bad thing. It also shows me what other applications we're using single sign-on to connect to. So I have a corporate Dropbox configured that Megan can connect to with her Azure AD credentials. I have a Salesforce instance that Megan connects to using Azure AD. And so I'm able to track what she's connecting to besides the standard Office 365 applications. As long as she's going through Azure AD, I have the ability to track what she's doing. And that's where this concept of managing the identity being the control plane, that's where this becomes very important. If I go to the user page from Megan, I get some good information about her, the activity that she's performed and maybe alerts that I need to take a look at. So I'm looking at Megan. There's no high priority alerts, but I do have some interesting things. So today, 5/28/20, which you can see there, if I make this a little bit bigger, I see activity from an infrequent country. Now, let's see why it's considering the login to be from an infrequent country. I need to allow pop-ups here. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so here I am looking at the login, the alert that came from an infrequent country. Now this is kind of interesting. So this is just a few minutes ago, not long ago, 3:44 p.m. And I think this time zone is for Pacific time, so it's not too terribly long ago that this happened. But notice that it's saying that United States is an infrequent country. Now, why is that? So if we go up here and look at the description, we see that Megan Bowen performed an activity. No activity was performed in the United States in the past 2 days. Okay? So it's not simply the fact that she has never logged in from the United States. It's not saying that she's never logged in there and that this is completely out of context for her. What it's saying is that this is not following the same pattern that she typically demonstrates. So her activity does not match up with what we're seeing more recently. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just saying, just maybe take a look at it. Is this common for her? It tells me what device, what type of device she was connecting from, what OS, what browser. Tells me what her IP address was when she connected, and what application she was connecting to. So I get this very big picture of what was taking place and why this alert was thrown. Now, I talked about the connected apps, so let's go back there.
Hi, David. Just a reminder, you just have 2 more minutes.
Oh, okay. Then what I'll just show right here is I have the ability to connect a variety of different applications to Cloud App Security. So I've got a G Suite instance connected. I've got Azure, Dropbox. I've got Amazon connected. It's not the configuration isn't quite correct right now. Salesforce and Office 365. So I can track what's going on in all these applications, and depending on what the APIs have made available to me, right? G Suite opens up an API, Dropbox opens up an API. I may be able to do things like Azure Information Protect documents that exist in G Suite. I may be able to prevent external sharing of files in Dropbox, depending on what functionality they've made available to me. So let me go back to the presentation, and then we'll wrap up here. All right, so we did the demo. So really the point that's being made here is that protecting your data requires you to protect your identities. I showed you many different ways that Azure AD makes that possible for you, as well as some of the other tools within the M365 suite. And really it comes down to this: we can trust no one. So thank you very much for joining my session. I appreciate your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was useful for you, that you're able to implement some of these things in your own environment. Please provide speaker feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the presentation, on the demos, on the products themselves, as well as event feedback. Please provide feedback on the event. Make sure that you have registered for the raffle at that bit.ly address. They're giving away 3 Oculus Quests devices, and all-in-one sets. So that would be fun to have. And then by all means, please consider donating to these different charities. So these are the folks that are on the front line battling the coronavirus, and we certainly want to support them for all that they're doing and all that they're putting at risk. So give that some thought. So thank you very much for your time and your patient attention. And if you have any questions, I will check those in the chat. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, David. I guess this was amazing. I wanted to ask you one question. Is it all real-time data?
What I was looking at?
Yes.
Some of it is older data, but some is real time. So I mean, like the time when I logged in to the cloud app security, that was just an hour or two ago.
Oh, that's amazing, because the way of you have configured it is so amazing.
Yep.
Thank you, David. Initially, the 5 minutes your screen was not being shared, so I think your presentation deck will be shared with us, which can be shared with everyone, and they can see it from there, what you were sharing the first 5 minutes. But other than that, it was amazing.
Great. Sorry it wasn't shared initially. That's a bummer.
No,